Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. StratGamer here, providing you with a new Anno 1800 episode, and we are back with a scholar run. We're trying to get as many scholars as possible without any export import. And if you've seen my previous video, you know that today we're going to talk about the new world, and we're going to talk about how we are feeding investors. And in this island here, as you can see, there's quite a lot of fuel stations, 5 fuel stations, around one trade union, and thanks to all those 5 fuel stations, we are able to produce all of the coffee and all of the chocolate that we need for 500,000 investors on one island. So that's what we're gonna look at today. What are the items I'm using? What are the total production? Why I did some of the things the way I did them. So hope you're ready for this episode and you're in this teaser, and let's dive in. Before I dive in though, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you're into strategy games, city building games, simulations. That's exactly what I cover. And in particular, you may know that a new DLC of Anno 1800 is coming out soon, and I will of course cover it. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to check that out. Okay, let's dive in into this island and take a quick look around. So this is the island. As you can see, a lot of piers here, a few piers there. I'll probably build more in the future there too. Then we have production buildings like chocolate factories, coffee roasters, as well as all of the plantations. Like here, coffee plantations, here, cacao plantations, something else here, the fuel stations. As you can see, delivering fuels everywhere with one trade union covering them. And lastly, or two last things, all of my fuel is here, as you can see, and some museums and botanical gardens that we will dive into. So that is overall the island that you can see. Now, without further ado, let's look at the total production on this island. Let's start with the agricultural products. Cacao 174 per minute, I need 168. Coffee beans 425, I need 421. So we are good on all of these two. And then as byproduct, through items, we're also making tobacco, grapes, red peppers, and potatoes. To be completely frank, not using at all the potatoes, not using at all the red pepper, because we're not doing export import, let's remember. So this is just useless for me, it's fine. The grapes are somewhat useful. The truth is I'm making more than what I need, but we do need some for investors, right? And lastly, the tobacco is useful for the cigars, which will be the next episode. The next episode in our series will be cigars. So if you're interested into that, I'm doing it quite a different way from other people. So in terms of these agricultural products, all good. There's no intermediate, there's just a few gold mines, but that's not important. No construction material, obviously. And then what's important is the consumer goods. Let's see. So we are at 300 for coffee, and we are at 169 for 68, sorry, for the chocolate. And you may, if we look here, you may see that this is not completely linked to what we're producing. In particular, you don't directly see the coffee link, right? Because coffee, you thinking, okay, 425, or is that linked to 309? And then even 309, that's not really linked to, um, it's not as if you do 168 plus 309, that doesn't make 425, right? So something is going on, and we're going to look at that in details. One element to consider is that we are using quite a bit of oil, right? 35 if the island was working at full speed, but we're actually producing way more than that, so that's not a problem. And then you may wonder why I have 5 of these fuel stations when it's producing a lot more than what I actually need. The reason is actually because these numbers, which are sort of theoretical, don't always work, especially with the distance. And by that I mean is this fuel station here needs to be able to deliver all the way here, all the way there, all the way there, and all of the way there, including that one, the last one. And you can see it is green, right? So they are in the distance, but for some reason, when I only had 4 of these, there was always some lag. Some of the fuel stations weren't, not some of the fuel stations, sorry, some of the tractor barns weren't fully fueled. And I think it is, from what I read for many people, is really linked to distance, because it just takes too long for the barns, I don't know what they're called actually, but those small things here to deliver the fuel. So anyway, that's why I put a fifth one. Okay, now let's start with the coffee plantations. And I don't think I would teach you a lot by saying that these are the best items you could hope for. You need to reduce as much as you can the modules. There's a lot of videos out there. I'm very happy to explain to anyone who doesn't believe me that the best way to optimize your production in terms of farms is to reduce the number of modules, especially when you increase your production above 100%. So with things like tractors, etc. The only exception to this is actually the tractors, where it does increase your number of modules, but the boost that you get with the 200% plus the one item, the one additional item every 3 cycle, makes up for this 50% increase way more. So this is the only exception. So we're reducing with Horticulturalist Herman and with Arborist by 10%. And that's also how I get the extra good, right? The tobacco is this one, and then the red pepper, potato, and grapes. And then the best item to increase your productivity, but also reduce your workforce, is the miraculous steel plow. With 50% productivity and minus 50 workforce. If you combine that minus 50 with the minus 50 that comes from the tractors, as you can see here, right, plus 200%, minus 50 for the workforce, and 1 coffee bean every 3 cycles, you then get 0 workforce, which is what we want, right? There's no houses at all here, and that's also how you can go then into your working condition and increase them by 50% more, meaning you'll get a huge productivity. So that's for the coffee plantation. I'll put also, of course, in the description below a link to this template or to this layout. And then one thing I did want it to cover quickly was around the warehouses. Basically, on the warehouses, I'll post the link below in the description. There's also a theoretical, limit or number of warehouses that you want based on your production speed. But there's also quite a few problems with distance and with things like integrated chains. So, for example, here, the coffee can deliver to these guys here, and that often throws up those theoretical numbers. So the way I do it is actually trial and error. I'm gonna put all of these buildings, put a couple of warehouses, and if I see it's stalling in the warehouses in terms of delivery, then I'm gonna add one or two more, and that's sort of the way I do it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but that's the way. So these are the coffee plantations. You can see I have some here and some here mainly. Then let's move to the cacao. As you can see here, similar items, exactly the same. There's no specific items for coffee, no specific item for cacao, so just use those ones. These are the best. I won't explain again. This is exactly the same reason. Similar for the warehouses. Now, what's a bit more interesting and important is let's look at those production factories. But let's start with the coffee, because coffee is quite simple, right? You know that it goes from coffee beans to actual coffee. 3 items that I chose, and I am really convinced that these are the best one if you are in the situation where you don't want, you don't have population on the island and you want to use the 50% increase. So the first one, Marco della Moca, just impossible to beat. In productivity plus 50% plus coffee bean every 2 cycles. So basically, it's halving the need for coffee beans, and that's why here those ratios don't make sense at all, right? Because in particular, if we look, sorry, here you can see that a coffee roaster is 30 seconds and a coffee beans is 1 minute. So you will actually need twice the amount of coffee beans for the sort of amount of coffee. But here with that, with Marco della Moca, that really reduces that. Basically, you can see here I have 2 full coffee plantation sort of layouts, right? Without that guy, I would basically need 4. So that's huge when you see how big these fields are. Then the coffee sommelier is quite important for me. 2 reasons. Well, it's good productivity boost, but the second reason is the workforce needed, minus 50%. She's one of the only that will provide you both productivity and the workforce needed, reduced, right? And given that I want to get to 0% zero workforce, that's huge. And then you finish with the extremely loud bell to get to 0 workforce. Now we can check that. 0 workforce. So here it is for the coffee. One thing I did wanted to show you is, given how critical Marco is, and also kind of the coffee sommelier is, where do you find them, in case you don't really know. So the first thing you want to do is press Ctrl T, because that will get you to the page of the item for that island. So here we can see which one I'm using. You can click on it, and usually by default you're more on item location, then you click on item source and you can see where you can get them. It doesn't show the percentage. For example, if you do this expedition, what is your chance to have it? Is it 1%, 5%, which you do see in the external asset viewer. So that's why I prefer usually to use the external asset viewer, but to be frank, the easy way to get it here is not to rely on expeditions, not to rely on quests, where it's going to be quite low. Visitors or military wars, just go for the research institute. So that would be a good way to do it, in particular because it's not like you need 50 of them, you need a few of them. So the research institute will be great. And similarly for the coffee sommelier, you can use the research institute, but there you do have another, it's a good alternative, which is Isabel Sarmento, where you'll probably have to roll the dice a few times, but still that doesn't take you too much time and probably not that much money. So it is good to get it there. Okay, now let's move to the chocolate. And before I show you what I'm doing on chocolate, let's look at the, let's say, basic chain. So the basic chain does use cacao that we have here, right? But it also uses sugar that comes from the sugarcane plantation. And this we don't have here, right? But I promised you that this was an island to produce all of the chocolate. Did I lie? No, because with some items you don't have to use sugar. As you can see here, to make my chocolate, I'm actually using cacao and coffee beans. How is that? Well, with this great item, the quality chocolatier. Replace input instead of sugar, the building processes coffee beans, and on top of this, produces coffee every 3 cycles, which is once again why, if you remember correct, here, the sort of number 309 was actually very hard to link to the number of coffee beans that we had here. And we can even see it actually here, right? We have the chocolate factory is producing some, and then our normal coffee roasters. So it's two sources in a sense. And then, so the only issue with that quality chocolatier is that it's not impacting my workforce. And we all know that we want to get to zero workforce. So then you don't really have a choice. You need to use the human incarnate to get workforce minus 50 and the Lord Bell again 50 again to get to zero. So the chocolate factories don't have a lot of boosts, to be honest, right? Because this doesn't bring you boost, doesn't bring you boost. You do get the 50%. That's the only sort of boost that you're getting. But with this, you don't need any workforce. That's quite nice, in my opinion. So here's the island. Oh, and lastly, sorry, almost forgot. What do we have here? The first one here is Origin of Mankind, because it gives 5% to your crop farms, so your coffee and chocolate. The minus 5% for workforce we don't need, but anyway, it's still there. And then the second, which you honestly don't need, but it can be useful, in particular if you're trying to do a scholar record, is the god of the delta, because it will reduce your influence need by half, meaning you will need a lot less investors. And then here is the botanical garden with Anden garden, which will provide you plus 25% for your coffee plantations. There's none for cacao, unfortunately, so this is the only one we have here. And I can show you very quickly. If we look here, we do see the Origin of Mankind and then both impacting. So it is for this coffee and chocolate island, and as a reminder, this is producing 300 and more than 160, which is what you need for 500,000 investors, if you're using, of course, the newspapers to reduce your consumption. Which, if you're doing a record, right, a population record, be it scholars or investors, you will use these newspapers, right? Because it will, if you use 3 of them together, it will reduce consumption by, I think it's 68%. Means basically you only need 1/3 of the resources that you would normally need. So it is for this episode. Don't hesitate to share any comment, questions, feedback that you may have, and I hope to see you in the next video where we're going to talk about my cigar production. And again, it's a very different cigar production from what you may have seen in the past.